Elias Novak had never been prone to dreams, at least not the kind that clung to him after waking. But in the weeks leading up to his neuroscience final exams, the nights began to change. It started with fleeting images, sepia-toned glimpses of cobbled streets, cold steel trains, and a woman's silhouette blurred beneath a falling sky. Then came the whispers, always the same soft, pleading, in a language he didn't speak. French, maybe? He couldn't be sure. The woman in his dreams bore a face both unfamiliar and achingly familiar, as if seen through a misted mirror. Her name floated to him like a forgotten lullaby, Mira. She would turn toward him, eyes wide with urgency, and say, "You mustn't forget." By day, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something foreign had taken root in him. A final-year university student known for his quiet demeanor and logical mind, he found himself scribbling in cursive letters. He didn't remember learning dated in the 1940s, signed not as Elias, but as Mira. He chalked it up to stress, overwork, or perhaps the result of too many sleepless nights. But his professors noticed his growing detachment. His classmates whispered when he forgot what year it was during a presentation, or when he muttered unfamiliar words under his breath during a study session. He began spending long hours at the campus library, drawn to archives on European history and war-era resistance movements. Photographs of bombed-out cathedrals, ration tickets, and coded resistance letters sent chills through him. But he couldn't explain why. He stopped seeing his friends, skipping group projects and meals. Sleep became both a necessity and a terror. He longed for answers, but dreaded how vivid the dreams had become. He saw himself, or Mira, running through smoke-choked streets, hiding behind rubble, clutching papers marked with strange insignias. Her face was never fully clear, but her fear was. And her message grew louder, "Remember me." In one especially disturbing dream, Elias awoke standing in his kitchen at 3:17 a.m. Hands black with ink, an old war song humming on his lips. The song wasn't from any playlist he owned. When he searched the melody online, he found it, a French resistance anthem last recorded in 1943. He tried to laugh it off the next day, but deep inside, something began to crack. Elias had always believed in the rational, the tangible. But now, a question haunted him. What if the dreams weren't dreams at all? What if they were memories? And whose memories were they? In the quiet of his student apartment, Elias sat staring at a blank notebook. He felt as if he were living on the edge of someone else's story. And the story wanted to be told. Elias sat stiffly in the chair across from Dr. Hallberg, a campus-affiliated psychiatrist whose office was lined with soft lamps and the scent of lavender tea. He'd resisted coming, telling himself that the dreams, the obsessions, the language slips were just stress-induced symptoms of a final-year breakdown. But when he found himself standing outside a train station he'd never visited, speaking fluent French to a startled vendor, something inside him cracked. The word the vendor repeated over and over, resistante. Mira wouldn't leave his head. Dr. Hallberg asked questions with professional calm, but her eyes betrayed curiosity. When Elias recounted the dreams, always from the perspective of the same woman, always framed in wartime terror and whispered urgency, she took notes, pausing only when he described the growing compulsion to write in a cursive style he didn't recognize. "It's like someone else's hand moves mine," he said, holding out a notebook filled with looping lines in French, dated 1944. Hallberg ordered a battery of tests. MRI scans revealed something unexpected, an unusual neural pattern in his limbic system specifically, a low-frequency synchrony not typical in someone his age. It was as if two distinct memory sets were coexisting, occasionally blending, flaring into activity during sleep. More troubling was a surgical scar along the base of Elias's skull. When asked, he blinked blankly. "I've never had brain surgery," he said. The discovery sent Elias into a tailspin. He left the office without saying goodbye and skipped classes for days, locking himself in his apartment, digging through childhood medical records. His adoptive mother's silence over the phone when he confronted her was confirmation enough. A week later, she admitted the truth. When Elias was 6, He fell from a second-story window and suffered traumatic brain damage. The prognosis was grim until they were approached by a European medical trial offering a radical new neuroregenerative procedure. The details were never fully explained. All she knew was that it saved his life. Now, Elias understood what had been stirred. The procedure had included a tissue graft, neural reconstruction, donor material. But from whom? The answer seemed suddenly obvious. Mira. The woman whose voice slipped into his dreams, whose memories danced behind his eyes. Elias, the man, the student, the rationalist, was sharing space with someone else's unburied past. That night, Mira's dream was sharper than ever. She was in a dark room lit by a single swinging bulb, seated in front of a soldier who smelled of cigarettes and violence. He asked her questions she refused to answer. When he struck her, Elias felt the pain bloom across his own cheek. He awoke gasping. And for the first time he whispered her name aloud. Mira. Elias left the campus behind and followed the trail his mother had never dared name. With the help of university records and whispers from medical networks, he tracked down the defunct European clinic where his surgery had taken place. Street. Bellamy's Neurological Institute, now half closed and buried in the Swiss Alps. The archives were sealed, the staff long gone. But, through persistence and the help of a retired nurse named Adele, he unearthed the documents no one expected to still exist. The files detailed a controversial regenerative trial approved in desperation. His damaged hippocampus had been partially reconstructed using preserved neural tissue cultured from a comatose patient who died 3 days after Elias's procedure. The donor had no known family, no recorded identity. She was listed only as patient number 47M. But among the files was a photo. Elias stared at the black and white image of a woman strapped to a hospital gurney, her hair matted, eyes closed, a faint scar beneath her temple. Even in sleep, her expression bore the same tension, the same haunted grace he'd seen in his dreams. Mira. More digging brought more truth. Declassified French resistance records, matched with the hospital timeline, revealed her real name, Mira Levesque. She had been a courier for the underground during the German occupation, captured in 1944, tortured, declared brain dead after an escape attempt gone wrong. Her body remained alive for months, her mind presumably gone. Except it hadn't been. It had been waiting. Elias returned home with the file clutched like a sacred text. At night, Mira came clearer. Her memories no longer flitted like ghostlight. They marched, her brother being shot on the tracks, coded letters hidden inside a hollowed book, the rhythmic terror of interrogation drums. But they were more than memories now. Elias tasted her fear, felt her rage, wept her tears. And slowly, Mira appeared in waking life. A shimmer behind mirrors. A figure in the corner of his study. When he blinked, she vanished, but never fully. At first, he feared madness. Then he feared something worse. That Mira's soul was tethered to him, that the graft hadn't simply saved his life, it had bound them. Still, she didn't feel like a threat. She felt like a woman who had been unheard too long. Elias began recording his dreams, his flashes, his impressions. He filled notebooks with sketches of French cityscapes he'd never visited, military insignia he shouldn't recognize, and phrases in a voice that wasn't his. One night, he asked the empty room, "What do you want?" In a dream, she answered, "To be remembered, to finish what I began." And Elias knew he would have to follow her story to its end, even if it meant losing himself in the process. Underneath a white ceiling of blinking lights and humming machines, Elias lay in the neuro-mapping lab of a private research facility. Electrodes lined his temples. A technician adjusted the monitor, but it was Dr. Halberg who stood closest, watching him with a mix of dread and fascination. She had seen dissociation before, hallucination, delusion. But Elias wasn't unraveling, he was opening. This final session was a controlled dive into his mind. Hypnosis paired with neural stimulation. A last attempt to map what memories belonged to whom. Elias closed his eyes. The room fell away. He opened them into Mira's memory, no longer fragmented, no longer a dream. It was snowing. Paris, 1944. She stood on a bridge with a letter tucked into her coat, her fingers bleeding from the cold. Someone followed. She knew she would not make it across. She had memorized every word of the message. Even if she died, the memory would live. And in Elias it had. For the first time, Mira turned to face him, not in a reflection, but beside him. She looked tired. So very tired. "I am afraid to fade," she said. "But you are strong enough to carry the truth." He nodded. He didn't need to say anything. In the real world, his body seized briefly, then relaxed. The technician panicked. Dr. Halberg raised a hand. "Let it finish." Elias whispered in Mira's voice, then in his own. They wept together. They stood beneath a burning sky. They embraced. Then the memory dissolved. When Elias woke, he was calm, still. The hallucinations had stopped, but his eyes held something new, an ancient steadiness. Weeks later, he published Whispers of Mira, a memoir turned case study that straddled medicine, war history, and the paranormal. Some called it fiction. Others saw it as a miracle. He didn't argue. Dr. Halberg presented it at 3 conferences. A parapsychologist wrote a book titled Memory Beyond Flesh. Others with strange transplant stories reached out. But Elias lived quietly. In the final scene, he sits across from a young student interviewing him for a thesis. "Do you think she was a ghost?" the student asks. Elias smiles gently. "No. I think she was a woman who didn't want to be forgotten. And I think I was the only one who could remember her the way she needed." The student leans forward. "Do you still hear her?" He pauses. "Sometimes. In the silence between thoughts. Like the echo of a name I never knew before I was born." Outside, a breeze stirs the trees. A war-era lullaby plays faintly from a cafe radio. And across the glass, for a flicker of a second, Mira's reflection stands beside him. They smile together.